What would you do if someone humiliated you in front of your entire family? Well, today's story is about someone who found the perfect way to get revenge with just one simple question. But before we get into this absolutely wild story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because you won't want to miss stories like this one. And trust me when I say this, you're going to want to hear every single detail because this revenge is absolutely brilliant. Now, before we dive in, let me set the scene. This is about family dynamics, respect, and what happens when someone pushes the wrong person too far. So grab your snacks, get comfortable, and let's get into this story. Meet Mark, is a 28-year-old software engineer living in Seattle. Now, Mark has always been the quiet type in his family. You know the kind, keeps to himself, doesn't cause drama, just minds his own business and focuses on his career. He's the type of guy who would rather spend his weekend coding a new project or reading a good book than getting involved in family gossip. But sometimes being the quiet one means people think they can walk all over you, and that's exactly what happened to Mark. Now, Mark has this sister-in-law, Sarah. And Sarah, well, Sarah is one of those people who just has to have an opinion about everything and everyone. She's married to Mark's older brother, Dave, and she's been part of the family for about 5 years now. Dave met Sarah at his workplace. She was working in HR at the time, and they had this whirlwind romance that led to marriage pretty quickly. At first, everyone in the family thought Sarah was great. She was bubbly, outgoing, and seemed to make Dave really happy. But here's where it gets interesting. Sarah has never really liked Mark. Maybe it's because he's successful and she feels intimidated by that. Maybe it's because he doesn't engage with her drama and constant need for attention. Or maybe she's just one of those people who needs someone to pick on to make herself feel better. Whatever the reason, Sarah has made it her personal mission to make little comments and jabs at Mark whenever she gets the chance. It started small, you know? Comments about how he's always on his computer instead of socializing. How he doesn't have a girlfriend at 28, and maybe he should put himself out there more. How he's not really contributing to family conversations because he's too busy being antisocial. The typical passive-aggressive stuff that people say when they want to get under your skin, but don't want to look like the bad guy. Then there were the comments about his lifestyle choices. Sarah would make remarks about how he lived alone in his apartment, how he probably didn't know how to cook proper meals, how he was missing out on the real joys of life by not having a family of his own. She'd even go as far as suggesting that maybe Mark was too focused on work and money, implying that he didn't understand what really mattered in life. The worst part was how she'd do it in front of other people. At family barbecues, holiday dinners, birthday parties, Sarah would always find a way to slip in these little digs about Mark's character or lifestyle. And she'd do it with this sweet smile on her face, like she was just being helpful or concerned. But Mark could see right through it. But Mark, being the bigger person that he is, just ignored it all. He figured it wasn't worth causing family drama over some petty comments. His parents seemed to love Sarah. His mom was always talking about how wonderful it was to have another daughter in the family. His brother Dave was clearly happy and head over heels in love. So Mark thought, why rock the boat? Why cause problems over something that ultimately didn't really affect his life that much? Mark would just smile politely, change the subject, or excuse himself from conversations when Sarah started her little performances. He told himself that engaging with her negativity would only make things worse. He had a good life, a successful career, and plenty of friends outside the family. He didn't need validation from Sarah, and he certainly wasn't going to let her comments affect his self-esteem. Little did Mark know that his patience and willingness to take the high road was about to be tested in the worst possible way. And little did Sarah know that the quiet, unassuming guy she'd been picking on for years was about to show her exactly why you should never underestimate someone just because they choose to stay silent. So here's where our story really begins. It's Mark's parents' 35th wedding anniversary, and the whole family is gathering for a big dinner celebration. We're talking about 15 people here: parents, siblings, spouses, kids, aunts, uncles, the the whole extended family coming together for this special milestone. Mark's parents had gotten married young, right out of college, and they'd built this beautiful life together over 3.5 decades. Mark's mom, Linda, has been planning this dinner for months. She's the type of person who goes all out for family celebrations, and this was no exception. She'd spent weeks coordinating everyone's schedules, making sure all the kids and grandkids could attend. She'd made all of Mark's dad's favorite dishes, his famous pot roast, her homemade dinner rolls, green bean casserole, and that special chocolate cake recipe that had been in the family for generations. She'd decorated the house with photos from different stages of their marriage, set up the good china, and even created little memory cards for each table setting with fun facts about each year of their marriage. This was supposed to be this beautiful celebration of their marriage and their family. Mark's dad, Robert, had been looking forward to it for weeks. He'd even taken time off work, which was rare for him, because he wanted to be fully present for this celebration. The whole family was excited about it. It had been months since everyone had been together in one place. Now, Mark has been working on something really special for this dinner. See, he's not just a software engineer who codes all day. He's actually quite talented with technology, design, and multimedia production. It's something he'd picked up in college and continued as a hobby over the years. So when he heard about this anniversary celebration, he knew exactly what he wanted to create for his parents. Mark spent weeks, maybe even a couple of months, creating this incredible digital photo album and video montage of his parents' 35 years together. But this wasn't just some basic slideshow that you'd throw together in an afternoon. I'm talking about scanning hundreds and hundreds of old photos, some dating back to when his parents first started dating in college. Photos that had been sitting in shoeboxes and old albums for decades, slowly fading and collecting dust. He digitally restored faded pictures, corrected color imbalances, and even enhanced some of the really old ones that were barely visible. He organized everything chronologically, starting from their college days, through their wedding, the birth of their children, family vacations, holidays, birthdays, graduations, every major milestone and plenty of candid moments in between. But it didn't stop there. Mark synced everything to music, not just random songs, but music that was meaningful to his parents. Their wedding song, songs that were popular during different decades of their marriage, music from their favorite movies, even some classical pieces that his mom loved. He added smooth transitions between photos, created title cards for different time periods, and even included some subtle animation effects to bring the whole thing to life. This thing was a masterpiece of digital storytelling. He even went above and beyond by tracking down old family friends who couldn't attend the dinner and convinced them to record video messages congratulating his parents on their anniversary. We're talking about college roommates who lived across the country, old neighbors who had moved away, even some of his parents' former co-workers who had retired and moved to Florida. Mark spent hours coordinating these video calls, helping people figure out how to record messages, and then editing everything together seamlessly. The final product was about 45 minutes long, a professional quality production that captured not just the major moments of his parents' marriage, but the essence of their relationship and family life. Mark had even included some narration, using audio recordings from old family videos where you could hear his parents' voices from years past. It was the kind of gift that would make anyone cry tears of joy. Mark was actually really excited about this gift, which was unusual for him. He's typically pretty modest about his talents and accomplishments, but he knew this was something special. It wasn't often that he got to show his creative side to his family, and he knew his parents would absolutely love it. His mom was always talking about how she wished they had a better way to preserve and share family memories, and his dad was getting to the age where he was becoming more sentimental about the past. He'd been keeping this project completely secret for weeks, planning to present it right after dinner as the big surprise of the evening. He'd even brought his laptop and a portable projector so he could display it on the living room wall for everyone to see together. Mark had tested everything multiple times to make sure the technology would work perfectly. He didn't want any technical difficulties to ruin the moment. But Sarah had other plans for how this evening was going to go. See, she'd also prepared a gift for Mark's parents, and she was determined to make sure everyone knew about it. She'd bought them a weekend getaway package to some upscale spa resort about 2 hours outside the city. Now, don't get me wrong, it was a nice gift, thoughtful in its own way. But apparently, Sarah needed everyone at that dinner table to know just how thoughtful and generous she was being. From the moment she walked into the house that evening, Sarah was dropping hints about her gift. She'd make comments about how she'd been researching the perfect present for weeks, how she wanted to give them something they'd never buy for themselves, how important it was to show appreciation for everything they'd done for the family over the years. So dinner starts, and initially, everything's going great. Everyone's catching up, sharing stories about work and kids, laughing at old family jokes. Mark's dad is telling stories about the early days of his marriage, and his mom is showing off photos of the newest grandchild to relatives who hadn't seen the baby yet. The food is incredible, the atmosphere is warm and celebratory, and Mark's feeling really good about the evening. His gift is ready to go on his laptop, all set up and waiting, and he's just biding his time, waiting for that perfect moment after everyone finishes eating and the formal toasts begin. But then Sarah starts talking about her gift. And she's not just casually mentioning it in passing. She's going into full detail about how much research she did, how she specifically chose this particular resort because it had the exact amenities that his parents would love. She talks about how she called the resort multiple times to coordinate special services, how she made sure they'd have the best room available, how she even arranged for champagne and flowers to be waiting in their suite. Now, Mark's not jealous or competitive about gifts or anything like that. He genuinely thinks it's great that Sarah got his parents such a nice gift, and he's happy that they'll get to enjoy a relaxing weekend away. But there's something about the way Sarah is presenting this information that feels less like sharing and more like performing. Like she needs everyone at that table to understand just how much effort and thought she put into this gesture. And then, right as people are finishing their main course and Mark's mom is about to start clearing plates, Sarah looks around the table with this expectant expression and asks, "So what did everyone else get them for their anniversary?" The question hangs in the air for a moment, and Mark immediately feels a shift in the energy at the table. What had been a casual, celebratory dinner suddenly feels like some kind of gift-giving competition that nobody knew they were supposed to be participating in. One by one, people start sharing their gifts. Mark's brother Dave mentions that he and Sarah got them the spa weekend, even though Sarah had already explained it in detail, and then adds that he also got them a new coffee maker because their old one was starting to make weird noises. Mark's sister Lisa talks about the beautiful silver picture frame she found that would be perfect for displaying one of their wedding photos. His cousin mentions the gift card to their favorite restaurant downtown, the one where they'd had their first date decades ago. All nice, thoughtful gifts from people who care about Mark's parents and wanted to show their appreciation. Normal anniversary gifts that anyone would be happy to receive. And then all eyes turn to Mark. The table gets quiet, waiting to hear what the quiet, tech-savvy son has prepared for this milestone celebration. Mark could have just said he had a surprise planned for later, or he could have given some vague answer about still working on something special. But Mark has always been honest and straightforward, sometimes to a fault. So he looks around the table at all these expectant faces, takes a breath, and says simply, "I made them a digital photo album with all their memories over the years." And this is where everything went wrong. Sarah just looked at him and laughed. Not a little chuckle or a polite smile. A full, condescending laugh that cut through the warm dinner conversation like a knife. And then she said the words that would change everything. "Oh, Mark, that's so typical of you. You couldn't even be bothered to actually buy them something nice? You just threw together some photos on your computer? That's honestly kind of useless." Useless. She called his gift, his weeks of hard work, his thoughtful creation, his professional-level production useless. In front of his entire family. At his parents' 35th wedding anniversary dinner. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and you could feel the temperature in the room drop about 10 degrees. But it didn't stop there. Oh no, Sarah was just getting started. She had the floor now, and she was going to make sure everyone understood her point. She continued, I mean, anyone can put some pictures together on a computer these days. That's not really a gift. That's just, I don't know, something you do when you forget to actually plan ahead and need to throw something together at the last minute. Then she looked around the table, as if seeking validation for her cruel assessment, and added, It's like when kids make those construction paper cards at school because they don't have money to buy real presents. It's sweet, I guess, but it's not really the same as putting thought and effort into finding something meaningful. The comparison to a child's craft project was the final insult. Sarah had essentially reduced months of Mark's professional-level work to the equivalent of a kindergarten art project. And she did it with this patronizing tone, like she was being helpful by pointing out how inadequate his gift was compared to her spa weekend. And here's the thing that made it even worse. Some of the family members were just sitting there awkwardly, not knowing how to respond. A few people tried to change the subject, with his aunt mentioning something about the weather and his cousin asking about dessert, but the damage was already done. The comfortable family atmosphere had been completely shattered by Sarah's verbal assault. Mark's parents looked incredibly uncomfortable. His mom had this pained expression on her face, like she wanted to say something, but didn't know how to address what had just happened without making the situation worse. His dad was looking back and forth between Mark and Sarah with this confused, disappointed expression. These were people who had raised their children to be kind and respectful, and they were watching their son get publicly humiliated at their own anniversary celebration. His brother Dave was staring at his plate like it contained the secrets of the universe, clearly mortified by his wife's behavior, but apparently too shocked or too conflict-averse to speak up and defend his own brother. The silence from Dave was almost as painful as Sarah's original attack. Mark was getting thrown under the bus by his sister-in-law while his own brother sat there and said nothing. The other family members were exhibiting that particular type of awkwardness that happens when someone crosses a line at a family gathering and nobody knows quite how to respond. Some were looking at their food, others were glancing at each other with raised eyebrows, and a few were looking at Mark with expressions of sympathy mixed with secondhand embarrassment. And Mark just felt this wave of humiliation wash over him like he was drowning in it. Here he was, a grown man, a successful professional, being treated like a lazy teenager who had forgotten about an assignment until the last minute. The gift he'd been so excited about, the project he'd poured his heart into, had just been dismissed as worthless in front of everyone he cared about. Imagine that feeling. You've put your heart and soul into creating something meaningful for the people you love, spent months planning and executing a professional quality production, and someone just dismisses it as useless in front of everyone who matters to you. Mark said later that it felt like being punched in the gut, except the pain lasted longer and cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. The worst part wasn't even the insult itself, it was the public nature of it. If Sarah had criticized his gift privately, it would have hurt, but it would have been between the two of them. But doing it at the family dinner, in front of his parents on their special day, in front of aunts and uncles and cousins who rarely saw him, made it 1,000 times more painful and embarrassing. But here's what Sarah didn't know. Here's what nobody at that table knew. Mark wasn't just some guy who threw together some photos because he couldn't be bothered to go to the mall and buy a real present. Mark was actually incredibly successful. Incredibly successful in ways that would make Sarah's head spin. We're talking about a senior software engineer at one of the biggest tech companies in Seattle, making well into the 6 figures, with stock options and bonuses that probably equaled Sarah's entire annual salary. But more than that, Mark had been keeping something from his family. Something big. Something that was about to make Sarah's comment about his useless gift the biggest mistake of her entire life. You see, Mark wasn't just successful at his day job. He'd been working on some side projects, some investments, some entrepreneurial ventures that had been paying off in ways that even he hadn't fully expected. And now, sitting at that dinner table, feeling the sting of public humiliation from someone who had no idea who she was actually messing with, Mark made a decision that would change the entire dynamic of this family gathering forever. Now, let me tell you something about Mark that his family didn't know. Mark wasn't just successful in the traditional sense of having a good job and a steady paycheck. Mark was what you might call quietly wealthy. The kind of wealthy that doesn't show up in flashy cars or designer clothes, but exists in investment portfolios and bank accounts that most people only dream about. You see, Mark had been investing his money wisely for years. While other people his age were spending their paychecks on expensive vacations, luxury cars, and keeping up with social media lifestyles, Mark had been putting a significant portion of his income into index funds, real estate investment trusts, cryptocurrency back when it was still relatively unknown, and various startup investments through his connections in the tech industry. But it went beyond just smart investing. Mark had multiple revenue streams that his family knew nothing about. He'd been developing mobile apps as side projects for years, and several of them had become surprisingly profitable. He had a passive income stream from online courses he'd created teaching programming and digital design. He'd even been doing consulting work for other tech companies on weekends, charging premium rates for his expertise. And then there was the big one, the software project he'd been working on for the past 2 years. It started as just a hobby, something he tinkered with in the evenings and weekends because he saw a gap in the market for a particular type of business management tool. What began as a simple application had evolved into a sophisticated platform that caught the attention of a major software company. Just 3 months before this anniversary dinner, Mark had sold that software for a sum that most people would consider life-changing money. We're talking about the kind of sale that could set someone up for early retirement if they wanted. But Mark had never been one to flaunt his wealth or success. He drove a reliable but modest Honda Civic that was a few years old, lived in a nice but not extravagant 2-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood, and generally kept his financial success to himself. He shopped at regular stores, ate at normal restaurants, and lived a lifestyle that appeared solidly middle class to anyone looking from the outside. This wasn't because Mark was cheap or didn't know how to enjoy his success. It was a deliberate choice based on his values and personality. He didn't see the need to make a big deal about his financial achievements, and he certainly didn't want his relationships with family and friends to be influenced or complicated by money. He'd seen what happened to other people when they suddenly came into wealth, how it changed the way people treated them, how it created expectations and resentments, how it could destroy genuine relationships. Mark preferred being seen as just a regular guy who happened to be good with computers. It was simpler that way, more authentic, and it allowed him to maintain genuine connections with people who liked him for who he was, not what he could do for them financially. Meanwhile, Mark knew something that made Sarah's attack even more ironic and cruel. He knew that Sarah and his brother Dave were actually struggling financially, and struggling badly. Dave had confided in him privately just a few months earlier that they were behind on their mortgage payments. The adjustable rate they'd gotten during better financial times had increased significantly, and Dave's salary from his job at the insurance company wasn't keeping up with their expenses. Sarah had been looking for a job for months after being laid off from her HR position, but the job market was tough, and she was being picky about the positions she'd consider. She'd turned down several opportunities because they didn't pay enough or weren't prestigious enough for her liking. Meanwhile, their credit card debt was mounting, and they'd even had to ask Mark's parents for help with some of their bills recently, a fact that Mark knew was eating away at his brother's pride. The spa weekend that Sarah was bragging about so extensively, Mark suspected that was probably charged to a credit card that was already maxed out, or maybe it was one of those deals where you pay a small amount up front and then get locked into a payment plan. He'd seen the financial stress wearing on his brother Dave over the past year, the way Dave had started declining invitations to go out for drinks or dinner, the way he'd stopped talking about vacation plans or home improvements. So here's the absolutely mind-blowing irony of the situation. Sarah was sitting there calling Mark's thoughtful, professionally crafted gift useless, and lecturing him about not putting enough effort into gift giving, while she was literally struggling to pay her own bills, and Mark was sitting on enough liquid assets to pay off her entire mortgage without it even making a significant dent in his net worth. Mark could have bought 10 spa weekends without thinking twice about it. He could have purchased the resort that Sarah was bragging about sending his parents to. But instead, he'd chosen to invest months of his time and considerable skill into creating something truly personal and meaningful for his parents' milestone anniversary. Mark said that in that moment, sitting at that dinner table while Sarah continued to make little comments about his cheap gift and his apparent lack of consideration for his parents, something inside him just snapped. Not in an angry, explosive way. Mark was too controlled for that. But something fundamental shifted in his approach to dealing with Sarah's constant needling and disrespect. He was done being the quiet one who just took it. He was done letting people walk all over him because he didn't want to cause drama. He was done being modest and humble when it was being interpreted as weakness and incompetence. And he was especially, definitively done with Sarah's condescending attitude and her need to make herself feel superior by putting him down. But here's the thing about Mark. He's not just successful, he's also extremely intelligent and strategic. He's not going to lose his temper or cause a scene like some people might. He's not going to start yelling about his bank account or listing his achievements to defend himself. No, Mark is going to do something much more effective and much more devastating. He's going to use Sarah's own arrogance and assumptions against her in a way that will expose her ignorance to everyone at that table. Mark is going to ask one simple, innocent-sounding question that will completely change the power dynamic at that table and leave Sarah wishing she'd never opened her mouth. So he sits there quietly, maintaining his composure while Sarah continues her little performance. She's still going on about how thoughtful her spa gift was, how she'd spent so much time researching the perfect present, how important it was for people to put real effort into showing their appreciation for family. She's feeling really good about herself now, convinced that she successfully put Mark in his place and demonstrated her superiority to everyone at the table. Mark just watches her, waiting patiently for the right moment. He's not rushing, he's not interrupting, he's just letting Sarah dig her hole deeper and deeper with every word. He can see his parents looking uncomfortable, his brother staring at his plate in embarrassment, other family members shifting awkwardly in their seats. The longer Sarah goes on, the more uncomfortable everyone becomes, and the more devastating Mark's response is going to be. And then, when there's finally a lull in the conversation, when Sarah has exhausted her commentary on gift-giving etiquette, and is sitting back in her chair with this self-satisfied expression, feeling really good about herself and how she successfully humiliated Mark in front of the entire family, Mark finally speaks up. This is the moment that Sarah had no idea was coming. This is the moment that would change everything. Mark looks directly at Sarah, and in the calmest voice you can imagine, he asks, "Sarah, how much do you think that spa weekend cost?" That's it. That's the question. Simple, innocent sounding, but absolutely devastating in context. Mark doesn't raise his voice, doesn't sound confrontational or angry. He just asks this one straightforward question, like he's genuinely curious about the price of her gift. Sarah, clearly proud of her generosity and probably thinking this is her chance to really drive home how much more thoughtful her gift was compared to Mark's thrown-together photo album, doesn't hesitate to answer. With this confident, almost boastful tone, she says, "Well, it was $800 for the weekend package. It includes the spa treatments, meals, and accommodations. But really, it's about the thoughtfulness and effort that goes into choosing something meaningful, not just the price." She emphasizes that last part like she's delivering some profound wisdom about gift giving, still completely oblivious to what's about to happen to her. And Mark just nods thoughtfully and says, "That's nice. I was just curious because I was thinking about what I spent on their gift." Now everyone's paying attention. The casual dinner conversation has completely stopped. You could hear a pin drop at this table. Mark's parents are looking at him with curiosity mixed with a bit of concern, probably wondering where this is going. Dave is looking confused, like he's not sure what his brother is getting at, but sensing that something significant is about to happen. And Sarah has this smug look on her face like she's about to be vindicated, like Mark is about to admit that he spent maybe $50 on some basic photo printing and prove her point about his cheapness. Mark calmly pulls out his phone and gestures toward his laptop bag sitting nearby. "Well," he says in that same measured tone, "let me tell you about the equipment I used for this project." He starts listing items like he's reading from a shopping receipt. The MacBook Pro I used for editing, that's about $2,800. The professional video editing software suite, another $600 annual license. The external hard drives for storing all the high-resolution files, $400. The professional-grade scanner for digitizing the photos, $800. The color calibration monitor to ensure accurate photo restoration, $1,200. Sarah's smug expression starts to falter slightly as the numbers add up, but she's not quite grasping the full picture yet. But Mark's not done. Not even close. And then there's the time investment, he continues, still in that calm, conversational tone like he's discussing the weather. "I spent approximately 80 hours working on this project over the past 2 months. That includes scanning photos, restoration work, video editing, audio synchronization, and coordinating with people for the video messages. At my current hourly consulting rate, which is what I charge when I do freelance work on weekends, that's $150 per hour. So we're looking at about $12,000 worth of time investment." The table has gone dead silent now. Even the background noise from the kitchen seems to have stopped. Sarah's face is starting to change color, and Dave is Then there's the professional photo restoration service I used for some of the really old pictures that were too damaged for me to fix myself. Mark continues, methodically building his case. That was $300. The music licensing fees, so I could legally use the songs that were meaningful to Mom and Dad's relationship. That was $150. The professional video production service I hired to help coordinate and edit the video messages from family friends who couldn't be here tonight. That was $400. By now, everyone at the table is doing mental math, and the numbers are getting staggering. Sarah looks like she's been slapped, and Mark's parents are staring at him with expressions of complete shock. "Oh, and I forgot about the custom packaging," Mark adds, as if this is just an afterthought. "I had a professional presentation box made to hold the USB drives and printed materials. That was another $200. And the professional printing of the photo books I created as a companion to the digital presentation, $250. The silence at the table is so complete it's almost oppressive. Everyone is staring at Mark, then at Sarah, then back at Mark again. And then Mark delivers the final, devastating blow. He looks directly at Sarah with the same calm expression he's maintained throughout this entire revelation and says, "So all in all, I invested approximately $17,350 in this useless gift that I apparently just threw together on my computer." But you're absolutely right, Sarah. Anyone can put some pictures together. I guess I just went a little overboard with the effort and thoughtfulness. The word useless hangs in the air like a physical presence. Mark has just taken Sarah's own words and turned them into weapons that completely destroyed her position. He's proven with mathematical precision that his gift wasn't just more expensive than hers, it was more expensive by a factor of more than 20. And he did it all without raising his voice, without being rude, without stooping to personal attacks. He just asked one innocent question and let the facts speak for themselves. Sarah looks like she wants to disappear into the floor. Her face has gone through several shades of red and is now settling into a pale, sickly color. She opens her mouth like she's going to say something, then closes it again. Opens it again, closes it again. For probably the first time in her adult life, Sarah is completely, utterly speechless. The silence at that table was absolutely deafening. Mark said later that you could literally hear the grandfather clock ticking in the next room, the sound of someone's watch, even the subtle hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive, like the air itself had gotten thicker. Everyone was just staring, some at Mark with newfound respect and amazement, some at Sarah with a mixture of shock and second-hand embarrassment, and others at their plates like they were suddenly the most fascinating things in the world. You have to understand, this was a family that had known Mark his entire life, and they had never seen this side of him. The quiet, modest guy who never bragged about anything had just delivered one of the most devastating verbal takedowns any of them had ever witnessed, and he'd done it with the calm precision of a surgeon. Sarah's face went through about 5 different shades of red, starting with a flush of anger, then moving through embarrassment, humiliation, and finally settling on what could only be described as mortification. She started to say something, opened her mouth like she had a comeback ready, then stopped as if the words had just evaporated. She started again, maybe trying to defend herself or deflect somehow, but stopped again when she realized that anything she said would just make the situation worse for her. For probably the first time in her adult life, Sarah, the woman who always had an opinion about everything, who never missed an opportunity to insert herself into conversations, who had built her identity around being the one with all the answers, was completely, utterly speechless. You could see her brain working, trying to figure out how to recover from this, how to spin the situation, how to minimize the damage to her ego and her reputation at this table. But there was nothing she could say. The numbers were facts. Mark's investment in his gift was documented, verifiable, and absolutely undeniable. Any attempt to argue or deflect would just make her look even worse. Mark's dad was the first person to break the silence, and bless him, he handled it perfectly. Robert looked at his son with this expression of pride mixed with amazement and just said, "Son, can we see this gift now?" No drama, no addressing the awkwardness, just a simple request that allowed everyone to move forward and gave Mark the opportunity to show his family what he'd actually created. And Mark, still maintaining that same calm demeanor that had served him so well during his takedown of Sarah, simply said, "Of course, Dad. I'd love to show you what I've been working on." He got up from the table, retrieved his laptop and portable projector from his bag, and began setting everything up in the living room while the family gathered around. As Mark was connecting cables and adjusting the projector, you could hear people whispering among themselves. His aunt was saying something to his uncle about how she had no idea Mark was so successful. His cousin was asking someone else if they knew about Mark's consulting work. The whole family dynamic had shifted in the span of about 10 minutes. And then the presentation began, and let me tell you, this thing was absolutely incredible. Mark had organized 35 years of family photos chronologically, starting with his parents' college days when they first started dating. The opening sequence showed them young and in love, with that particular glow that couples have in the early stages of romance. He'd restored faded colors in decades-old photographs, bringing life back to pictures that had been yellowing in photo albums for years. Some of these photos were from the 1970s and 80s, taken with old film cameras, and Mark had somehow managed to make them look like they could have been taken yesterday. The technical skill involved was obvious to anyone watching. The transitions between photos were smooth and professional, not the jarring cuts you'd see in amateur slideshows. Each transition was timed perfectly to the music, creating this seamless flow that drew you into the story of his parents' life together. And the music, Mark had carefully selected songs that were meaningful to his parents' relationship. Their wedding song, popular songs from different decades of their marriage, even some classical pieces that his mother had always loved. But the real masterpiece was how Mark had woven together not just photos, but the story of their family's growth over the years. You could see his parents growing older together, see the family expanding as children were born, watch the kids grow up, see grandchildren appear in more recent photos. It was like watching a time-lapse of an entire family's life, beautifully crafted and emotionally compelling. And then there were the video messages. Mark had tracked down college friends of his parents who now lived across the country, former neighbors who had moved to different states, old work colleagues who had retired to Florida. These weren't just quick congratulations messages either. These were heartfelt, detailed stories about memories with his parents, about what their friendship had meant over the years, about what a wonderful couple they were. The production quality was absolutely professional. The audio was clear, the video was high definition, the editing was seamless. This wasn't something someone had thrown together. This was the kind of work you'd expect from a professional video production company. By the end of the 25-minute presentation, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Mark's mom was openly crying, tears of joy streaming down her face as she watched decades of memories play out in front of her. His dad, who was typically more reserved with his emotions, was tearing up and had his arm around his wife. Even some of the extended family members were getting emotional, wiping their eyes and commenting on how beautiful the presentation was. It was clear to everyone watching that this wasn't just some thrown-together slideshow created by someone who couldn't be bothered to buy a real gift. This was a professional quality production created with genuine love, incredible skill, and an enormous investment of time and money. This was the kind of gift that would be treasured for generations, something his parents could show to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren someday. Meanwhile, Sarah was sitting in the back of the room, and you could practically see her shrinking into herself as the presentation continued. With each beautiful transition, each restored photograph, each heartfelt video message, the reality of her mistake became more and more obvious. She had just called a $17,000 labor of love useless, in front of everyone, and she'd done it while bragging about her $800 spa package, like it was the height of generosity and thoughtfulness. The contrast was devastating. Here was Mark's gift, months of work, professional-level skill, genuine emotional impact, and a price tag that dwarfed everyone else's gifts combined. And here was Sarah's gift, nice, but ultimately just something she'd ordered online and had shipped to a resort. The difference in thoughtfulness, effort, and investment wasn't even close. When the presentation ended, the room erupted in applause and praise for Mark. His parents were hugging him, thanking him over and over, saying it was the most beautiful gift they'd ever received. Other family members were asking him about his technical skills, his consulting work, how he'd managed to create something so professional. For the first time in years, Mark was the center of positive attention at a family gathering, and it was clear that everyone's perception of him had fundamentally changed. Mark's brother Dave pulled him aside later that evening and apologized privately. Dave said he had no idea Mark had put so much work and money into the gift, and he was genuinely embarrassed by his wife's behavior. He admitted that he should have spoken up when Sarah was attacking Mark's gift, and he felt terrible about staying silent while his own brother was being humiliated at their parents' anniversary dinner. Mark's parents couldn't stop talking about the gift for the rest of the evening. They made sure to tell every family member about how thoughtful and professional it was, how Mark had spent months working on it, how he'd tracked down old friends for video messages. They ended up displaying some of the restored photographs around their house immediately, and Mark's mom said she planned to show the video to friends and neighbors for weeks afterward. The energy at the dinner had completely shifted. Mark went from being the quiet, underestimated family member to being recognized as incredibly successful, talented, and thoughtful. People were asking him for advice about technology, about investments, about his work. The family dynamic had been permanently altered by this one moment of revelation. As for Sarah, she became very quiet for the rest of the evening, which was remarkable given her usual need to be the center of attention. She tried to make a few comments here and there, maybe attempting to recover some face or redirect attention away from her humiliation, but the energy had completely shifted. Every time she spoke, there was this underlying tension, like everyone was remembering what she'd said about Mark's gift. Everyone now knew that Mark wasn't the useless one in this situation. In fact, it had become crystal clear that Mark was probably the most successful person at that table, and Sarah had just publicly humiliated herself by attacking someone who was completely out of her league financially and professionally. The best part was that Mark never had to brag or boast to achieve this reversal. He'd simply asked one innocent question and let the facts speak for themselves. It was a masterclass in how to handle a bully, not with anger or insults, but with calm, undeniable truth that left no room for argument or defense. So what's the lesson here? Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should never underestimate. Mark didn't need to brag about his success or his wealth. He just let his actions speak for themselves. He spent years building his career, developing his skills, and creating financial security, all while maintaining his humble, low-key personality. And when someone finally pushed him too far, he didn't respond with anger or petty insults. He responded with facts. Sarah learned the hard way that making assumptions about people can backfire spectacularly. She saw Mark's quiet nature and modest lifestyle and assumed that meant he was unsuccessful, unambitious, or lacking in resources. She mistook his humility for weakness and his kindness for stupidity. And the best part? Mark never had to insult her or cause a scene. He just asked one simple question and let the facts speak for themselves. This story is a perfect example of why you should never judge a book by its cover, and why treating people with respect is always the smart choice. You never know who you're really dealing with, what they're capable of, or what they might be keeping private about their life and success. What do you think? Was Mark's revenge justified, or did he go too far? Should he have just ignored Sarah's comments like he had been doing for years, or was it time for someone to put her in her place? Let me know in the comments below what you would have done in Mark's situation. And if you enjoyed this story of quiet revenge and family drama, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more Reddit revenge stories like this one. I've got some absolutely wild stories coming up that you're going to want to hear. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, remember, never underestimate the quiet ones.